Okay, it's all enabled. Well, thank you very much for your being with me today. This is the seventh Oxford Humans Forum on Death and Dying. Today's guest is a hemato-oncologist, Professor Yoon So-young from Konkuk University in Seoul, Korea. Thank you, Professor Yoon. I know how busy you are and how much demanded you are in Korea, so I feel it's a great privilege to have you with us. And I'm sure the audience may feel the same way I do. Before we start, I want to introduce Professor Yoon to you briefly. Professor Yoon graduated the Medical College of Korea University in 1996, where she also did master's and PhD later. And she worked as a specialist in hemato-oncology department in 2001, well, from 2001 at the same university. And thereafter, she moved to Konkuk University in the same department in 2004. Konkuk University is also in Seoul as a full professor, where she has been teaching and researching in full scale. She was also a visiting scholar at University of California, San Diego in 2004 and 2005. Professor Yoon published many articles in prestigious journals, which include Anti-Cancer Research, Supportive Care in Cancer, International Journal of Hematology, Annals of Oncology, and Korean Journal of Internal Medicine, and so forth, to name a few. So she has written really on a variety of topics and published them. Well, there may be a number of questions you might ask about Professor Yoon, her background and activities, but you will have a chance to ask those questions in our Q&A session later. I'm very much looking forward to what she has to say today. She deals with terminally ill patients every day and witnesses death every day. So I'm sure she will have many things to say about cancer and death. And also she may have something to say to cancer patients and those who are looking after them at home or in a hospital. So I'm very much looking forward to today's session. And I would like to introduce Mr. Jinwoo, who will translate English and Korean later in our Q&A session. So we'll do the main session in English, but there will be translation provided later in the Q&A session. So I wish to say thanks to Mr. Yu as well. Well, without any further ado, let's start today's interview. Professor Yoon, you have a very nice background behind you.
The picture.
It's a picture, right?
Yeah.
Would you please elaborate a bit more about what you're doing as an oncologist?
Okay, first, thank you for having me. It's a great honor to be here. I am working at Konkuk University Hospital in Seoul as a medical oncologist, which is a cancer doctor. My main duty is treat cancer patients with chemotherapy, immunotherapy, and targeted therapy. In addition to doing cancer treatments, doing palliative care, hospice care, and end-of-life care, also my another main duty.
Yeah, I presume you have experienced all kinds of situations and have treated all different kinds of patients. So what is the general pattern of a cancer patient's reaction towards the end of their life. What is your view on those reactions or behaviors?
Some cancer patients cannot die peacefully, even if they are physically too weak and painful, because of the extreme fear of death. Pain is a subjective, emotional, and physically unpleasant feeling that results in total agony and social dysfunction. If patients were not too afraid of death, their physical symptoms or pain will be more easily controlled, and their dying process will not be that exhausting. The dying process should be peaceful, and the dying person must be in control of the process, like a captain navigating his ship. The extreme fear of death very often leads to unnecessary life-sustaining treatments. Meaningless life-sustaining treatments in ICU, intensive care unit, take away from the patients the precious chance to say goodbye to the family and friends. Patients often die alone in ICU. I think it is a miserable death, a very solitary one. The quality of well-prepared death will be completely different from that of a sudden lonely death in ICU.
Well, that's the purpose that we invited you for a talk today. I mean, how to prepare for death, really. I presume that by the nature of your profession, you see people dying almost on a daily basis. What do you think of death itself? Do you think death is the end, or is there something that survives even after we die?
I don't think it's over when you die. Death is not the end, but a migration to another level. In the East, people often treat death like just changing clothes, wearing new shoes, or returning to where they came from. In English, to die is synonymous with to pass away, but in Korea, to die means going back home. Passing away is a description of death from the perspective of the living people. Going back home, 돌아간다, 돌아가셨다 in Korean, is description of death from the perspective of the dying person. I often tell my patients, for half joking and half seriously, you have to throw away your old handcart and ride a new car, Ferrari. Death means just the death of the body, not the death of the consciousness. There are three pieces of evidence for an afterlife. The first one is NDE, near-death experiences, and the second one is deathbed vision, and the third is post-death communication. There have been a lot of patients and families who have had these experiences, and all their experiences are incredibly similar to one another. Personally, after the death of my mother and my father, they sent me a post-death communication. My father died of COVID-19 last year when he was 92 years old. Just before cremation, I heard his voice. He said, he will go well. It is 잘 가마 in Korean. It was a very clear, audible voice. This is the type of post-death communication that Guggenheim typically reported. The accent and pronunciation and manner of speech were all exactly those of my father's. It wasn't nothing like an imagination or hallucination. My mother died of pneumonia a few years ago at the age of 86. In a lucid dream, my mother turned up, looking peaceful and young in her 30s. I'm convinced that this wasn't just an ordinary dream. I was sure that my mother was sending me a typical visual post-communication. Carl Jung said that 1 out of 5 dreams came from the spiritual world, and the remaining 4 were wishful thinking. If I didn't know about the afterlife, I might have passed it as a simple dream. I found that my knowledge about the afterlife made me a big difference in the way I interpret these personal experiences. I have an interesting story to introduce about patients' NDE and OBE. OB is the out-of-body experience, which is a famous part of NDE. During my first year as a resident, Kuro Hospital, Konkuk, Korea University, that was 20 years ago. I was in charge of an 80-year-old woman who struggled with 3-vessel coronary heart disease and chronic kidney disease. She often suffered from cardiac arrest. She already had 3 times of cardiac arrest. Every time she went through it, she survived through resuscitation, which is electric cardioversion and heart massage. She already survived twice during her hospital stay. One day, she told me, "Don't do that again." How could you do that? We are close friends to each other, aren't we? How could you give me an electric shock to a close friend like me? How could you guys do laundry to the top of me? I was surprised and asked, "How do you know that?" She answered, "I saw you and the medical staff and myself on the ceiling." Really? You had a heart arrest. You didn't have any heartbeats and brain waves. You were not conscious at all. How were you able to look at what you're doing? You might be curious about the laundry thing here. In Korea, decades ago, Korean women gathered together and crouched down and did hand washes by streams. She mistook the cardiac massage with hand washing. Isn't it funny? At the same time, that was more than 20 years ago. At the time, that was more than 20 years ago, I didn't know anything about afterlife, NDE, and OBE. There was no way that I could understand what the elderly woman said. I just thought that she was confused because of her severe medical conditions. A lot of credible people talk about their own personal experiences, which is NDE, death vision. The experiences have so much common. It has profound positive impact on themselves. Throughout their lives, it is unforgettable and meaningful. There is no reason not to believe what they say unless you are willfully determined to do so. If you pay a little attention, there are so many literatures and YouTube contents that reports these things. They can make a significant difference to your life also.
Thank you. The story of the lady is fascinating. We all know in old days, women gathered together and kind of kneading way of laundering by riverside. That's really fascinating. I think it is one of the many typical examples of near-death experiences. What about other types of experiences? Do you have any cases of deathbed visions or death communication involving yourself or your colleagues in your hospital?
Good question, thank you. Dying patients, the soul of dying patients sometimes visit the medical staffs. I believe it happens because dying patients consider their doctors almost like their family. I didn't receive a visit in person. I'll introduce a few doctors who received the visit by patient soul. Actually, I received a visit from another person, not patients, but later, if I have time, I'll introduce. One case is about nephrologist, which is a kidney doctor visited by her dead patient. One Korean nephrologist was visited by her patients when she was staying temporarily in the United States as a visiting researcher. The patient suddenly appeared and told her, "I am not sick anymore. I dropped by to say goodbye." The patient looked healthy. When she came back to Korea, she looked up the medical record of the patient. She discovered that the time when the patient visited her in the United States, it was exactly the time the patient died. Is it a little scary? The second case is about a cardiothoracic surgeon visited by a dead patient's soul, an 11-year-old girl.
Professor Yoon, could I stop you? What is what did you say? Cardiothoracic? What is it?
Heart surgeon and lung surgeon.
Right, okay, thank you.
Surgeon. Yes.
Okay, thank you, yes.
Yeah. An 11-year-old girl received a cardiac surgery due to congenital heart disease. Despite the surgery and the intensive care following it, she died in the end, unfortunately. The resident came back home exhausted after she died. However, when he got home, he was surprised to see the deceased girl who appeared at his home. She said, "I came here to say goodbye and thank you. I am okay. I'm not sick anymore." She looked healthy and calm and smiling. The experience of the nephrologist and the cardiothoracic surgeon was remarkably similar. The last case is about my old friend, who is a doctor and died of cancer 20 years. It makes me a little bit more emotional. His name is Shin Jae-ha. He was my best friend when I was a resident in the Department of Internal Medicine. He got a malignant lymphoma, which is kind of blood cancer. Even though he had high-intensity chemotherapy, he was dying. I daily visited him. One day he told me, "Soyoung, there is somebody in the room, but I don't know who he is." He was actually mentally conscious and alert in spite of the severe illness. I couldn't answer the question. In those days, I didn't know that it was a deathbed vision. I didn't know anything about the existence of the afterlife. If I had known about afterlife and deathbed vision, I could have somehow answered the question and relieved his anxiety. I am still sorry for that. When children or young people die, they also report that they have visitors to their deathbed, but they often don't know who they are. Only already dead people visit dying patients on deathbed. It is one of the main characteristics of deathbed phenomena. No living person ever shows up on the deathbed. Dying children usually don't know who visited them because their parents and beloved family is still alive, and they don't recognize dead visitor's soul. This is very important for the question whether those visions are genuine experience or not. If deathbed visions are merely a wishful thinking, the children's parents must be the #1 candidate for the visit. But that has never been the case. This is one of the evidence that death visions are not a wishful thinking. Depending on whether you have the knowledge of deathbed vision, the interpretation can change. If you don't have it, you are most likely to ignore it as an insignificant event or even as a delusion.
Okay, if death is not the end, as you are arguing, what kind of advice would you give to your patients whose death is fairly close? Is there any way to help them to be prepared for the impending kind of departure?
There are a lot of uncertainties in the world, in life, but death is the only certainty. Cancer patients are able to predict their survival duration with considerable accuracy. I think there are two kinds of preparation for death. One is something you can prepare practically near the end of life, and the other is a lifelong preparation while you are still healthy. Practical preparation includes writing a will, passing on inheritance, and funeral arrangement. I think it's nice to hold a funeral before one's death. Before patients die, they can have a good time with the beloved family and close friends in advance and say goodbye leisurely in person. In Korea, many people sign on an official document called Advance Directives. In Korean, 사전연명의향서, 연명계획서. They direct not to have unnecessary life-sustaining treatments, such as CPR, the use of mechanical ventilator, and sometimes blood transfusions and antibiotics. If a patient wants to die at home, knowing about VSED is also helpful. VSED means voluntarily stopping eating and drinking gradually and gently, not abruptly.
Would you please able to explain a bit more about VSED?
With significant caregiving support, a determined and well-informed individual can successfully choose the end-of-life option of voluntarily stopping eating or drinking, so-called VSED. VSED is practiced when a mentally capable individual decides to control their own dying by making a conscious decision not to take foods and fluids near the time of their death. It is a gradual and non-violent process. A gradual fasting relieves pain efficiently and the patient feels better and alert. An excessive, unbalanced supply of nutrition and fluid causes swelling and physical discomfort, such as stomach pain and swallowing difficulty. Most dying patients don't want to eat because they don't have an appetite and can't swallow and can't digest foods. The time it takes until patient dies ranges from several days to a few months. Meanwhile, the patient can spend a precious time with family at home. What is more important than nutrition is to stay in a quiet, clean, and private environment with their beloved family. Death by gradual fasting is like falling leaves in autumn. It is natural, effortless, and elegant. It is death with dignity, not death in suffering. VSED relieves unnecessary distress. Many people, including Scott Nearing and several monks in the East, chose VSED. Scott Nearing chose VSED on his 100th birthday, as his wife Helen Nearing described in a beautiful book, Living a Good Life. I think if people know that death is not an end, but just moving to a new world without a sick body, more people will choose VSED as a way of natural death.
Right. I think the overall kind of flow of your argument is death is not necessarily a bad thing, it's a good thing, if I understood you correctly, what is the implication for that for how to live?
I think living a full life results in good death. It's like a fulfilling day brings good sleep. The Roman philosopher Cicero said that the whole life of a wise man is the meditation of his death. German philosopher Heidegger also said that if I take death into my life and face it, I will free myself from death anxiety and will be free to become myself. I think good life and good death are two sides of a coin. Death is the most important part of life. Good death can't be separated from good life, and vice versa. To have a good life and good death, you should study with a positive mindset about death, including NDE, death vision, and the afterlife, and post-death communication. It is too late to study the afterlife on the brink of death. The point is not whether it is scientific or unscientific, or even whether you believe it or not. It's enough for you to be open to the idea of afterlife and curious about it. Thousands of people have had common experiences, both in the East and the West, for thousands of years. A countless number of credible people have been reporting them over and over again. Even if you don't experience them personally, the knowledge of other people's experiences great helps. It also helps to reduce the death anxiety of cancer patients, relieve the sorrow from the family, and alleviate the burnout of medical staff. That's what I have been witnessing in the field of medical care, which is like a fierce battlefield.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I want to ask a series of similar questions. I want to call this "If Death is Not the End," the serious question. If, as you say, death is not the end, are there any advices you want to give to those who are looking after cancer patients at home or in a hospital? I mean, those who are looking after patients who are very close to their death.
I think the family should talk frankly about the patient's condition, and if necessary, even their eventual death. You should never avoid talking about the death. The vague kind of comforting words, like "you are okay, you are getting better," make the patient feel more lonely and even miserable. The family needed to help patients to do what they want before it is too late. They are, for example, saying goodbye to close people, making personal or social contribution, paying off for debt, forgiving people, and asking for forgiveness, relieving themselves of material obsession, and anticipating a pleasant afterlife. And another important thing is to give the patient permission to die. Do not cry loud. Don't say like this: "Don't die. How could you live? How could I live without you?" Dying patients can feel a heavy burden from this kind of overly emotional response. Just to say like this: "You may go. Follow the light. Don't worry about anything. I will continue what you have been doing and do your unfinished work. We will meet again. I remember you and I love you." Even if you know the existence of afterlife, undoubtedly the bodily separation from the beloved is something very sad. But there must be love, humor, and gentle care in the dying process. Patients should be like a captain of a ship directing their own dying process, and the family should help them with gentle but active care.
Right, thank you. And the second question of this series, if death is not the end, what would you say to your fellow doctors about the way they fight cancers and treat patients? Will there be any alternative approaches to the existing practices you would like to suggest?
If you are convinced that there is life after death, you can focus on more meaningful treatment and reduce ineffective ones to provide a better quality of medical care. Medical resources are limited. You don't want pour excessive human and material resources into what is fundamentally a natural process. Medical staff should not regard a natural process as a failure of medicine or science. We must accept that science and medicine are not omnipotent. They can never be. If we don't accept death as something natural, families and the medical staff may feel excessive frustration about the death of a patient. That prevents the families and friends from the normal mourning reaction, and the medical staff may suffer from emotional burnout. Currently, with the development of science and medicine, patients are given many unnecessary life-sustaining treatments. This causes pain to patients, leaves a guilty feeling with their families, and brings emotional burnout and a sense of helplessness to medical staff. This kind of cumbersome practice makes everybody in the loop of loser. Just as life is very personal and unique, so is death. Doctors should play a supporting role, not a main role, in the dying process. It will make significant difference to medical staff if they know that death is just a migration, not an end. I think it is one of core competence of doctor. Am I speaking too strongly? Doctors are always on the front line of battle between life and death, but doctors tend to focus only on the patient's physical condition, disease or illness. But humans are both physical and spiritual beings, especially when you are about to die. You cannot be physically comfortable until the spiritual side is satisfied. By knowing the spiritual aspect, doctors can reduce patients' pain and anxiety more efficiently and make them more comfortable. Even for me, knowing the afterlife was a great help as a doctor. My depression, despair, burnout have decreased significantly. When I take care of the patient, I feel less burden now. And I know I become a happier doctor. Sometimes I think my life as a cancer doctor, medical oncologist, is pretty good. It's great when a patient is cured by treatment, but it's also rewarding to see them pass away peacefully after a long journey.
Yes, I can feel that you're definitely you are a happy doctor. I can see on your face.
Sometimes.
Right. Does your belief in afterlife affect in any way on how you teach your students? What do you tell them about afterlife, and how much do you think the issue of afterlife should be incorporated in the formal curriculum of medical college?
As an oncology professor, I teach these aspects to the medical students and residents of internal medicine. I mention to them books like The Art of Dying by Peter Fenwick, Life After Death by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, Many Lives, Many Masters by Dr. Brian Weiss, Life Before Life about Children's Reincarnation Memory, written by Dr. Jim Tucker in Virginia University. Teaching known facts about death and afterlife are both useful and necessary. I think it should be included in the formal curriculum at medical schools. Death education is essential, not only for medical students, but also for all children. We commonly experience the loss of a loved one, often starting from an early age. I think death education should be given as extensively and as early as sex education, because life and death are closely connected to each other. In particular, I introduced the following 5 aspects of death and afterlife. The first involves the case of NDE and death vision. The second is about the children who remember their past lives. Past life memories have been extensively studied by Professor Ian Stevenson and Jim Tucker at the University of Virginia in the United States. The third one is about reincarnation reports by Dr. Brian Weiss. He's a psychiatrist. He first put off the publication of his book for 4 years because he was afraid of cynical reactions from the academic and scientific communities. Also, he was afraid of damaging his career as a doctor and a promising young professor. But he couldn't ignore the important facts anymore, which finally led to a decision to publish the book. The first one involves the introduction of Emanuel Swedenborg, who is a great medieval thinker, and Daskalos, who is known as a modern saint of the Mediterranean region. The last one is a proven case of mediumship. One clear case of white crow is enough to provide falsity of the argument that all crows are black. Arthur Conan Doyle, Pride of England, writer of Sherlock Holmes, was a deep researcher about the afterlife. His wife, Jean, was also a spirit medium.
Right. When you talk about your belief in an afterlife, how usually do your patients and medical colleagues and your students react? I presume some of them must have reacted in a way that is not entirely happy to you, quite disappointing way. In that case, what do you usually say to them? Do you try to convert them?
No. There is some resistance because death education in the medical school is unusual. Moreover, there are disagreements even within the medical circle whether death education can be science-based or not, whether the claimed death-related phenomena are true or not. Because modern science tends to believe something only if it can be brought and reproduced in the laboratory. I think people commit the mistake of denying what they don't know due to the lack of the courage or curiosity of the unproven knowledge by scientific method in a narrow sense. Even though we cannot prove certain things by the standard method of science, if they happen over and over again, you should not ignore them. You should have at least curiosity and courage to explore them with an open mind, especially on important matter such as death. At the very least, you should remain a sympathetic skeptic, like Dr. Ian Stevenson said. You should not be bound by narrow scientific methodology. The beginning of the paradigm shift of science is based on the discovery of something we do not understand. I don't know much about quantum mechanics. I hope that it will be able to explain the non-locality of consciousness and afterlife someday. Pascal made a sensible joke about whether you should believe in God or not. If we did not believe, but actually there is God, it will be a great loss. If you believe, but it turns out there isn't, you still have nothing to lose. The same argument applies to life after death. I think personal approach is also effective. Everyone will lose loved ones in the end. Imagine that the beloved one is about to die, or you are about to die. What is the most helpful thing? It's very important to take a realistic approach for those in need. Also, children wonder what happens after they die as much as they wonder how they were born. How would you answer that? I think we need death education for children from an early age based on known facts.
Okay, thank you. Let me ask a question that I believe is also important to other doctors who work in a similar situation. How do you manage to keep a balance in your life, or peace of mind, if you like, while you have to sleep with death and wake up with death every morning? I'm just wondering.
Thank you for your question. I try to live faithfully, but I try not to work hard. The balance between work and relax is important. I am practicing a meditation technique called kicking thoughts. It is not getting rid of thoughts, but it is to recognize a small gap between thoughts. Meditation helps me to live a balanced life. I think doing meditation helps us to catch a glimpse of the invisible world beyond the human sense indirectly. Even though I can acquire the knowledge of death by listening to other people's experiences, meditation also can bring similar spiritual experiences sometimes, even before you die physically. Our body and brain are sensitive reactants to signals from the other side. Even if we are not a medium psychic, we can detect signals from dead relatives and friends or from master soul, if you are lucky. If you pay little attention and have an open mind, meditation allowed me to do that by myself somehow. Kicking your thoughts technique is very simple. You can do it right now. First, draw a yellow circle in your imagination. I call it totem. Totem can be a full moon, a flower, and a blue square, any simple image you can easily imagine of. When you wake up in the morning, you decide to imagine it 10 times a day for 2 seconds each. It is just 20 seconds in a day. Don't feel pressure at all. The thing is, you should never force yourself. You can image totem anytime. Actually, I only make up my mind in the morning just once, and the rest comes naturally. It is all about not working hard yourself, but letting it done by itself, effortlessly, almost passively. Imagination of totem has the same effect on you as kicking thoughts, interrupting the constant flow of thoughts for a while. Just try it for fun right now. If you practice it for a few months, you can feel the invisible world beyond human senses coming in us on its own if you are lucky. Each person can feel it in different ways, such as relief, or vitality, or stillness, or spaciousness, so on. The feeling is beyond the language, hard to put into words. You can be a more sensitive receptor to the various words and live without boring stereotype thinking. Meditation helps me live alive and free as true myself. It is easy and fun. Doing it with friends and sharing its experiences on a regular basis far amplifies the effect. I strongly recommend.
That sounds fascinating. It sounds like, is it Buddhist kind of meditation, Zen Buddhist kind of meditation? I think we should really have another session and invite you for the meditation technique. It sounds.
Yes, I hope so someday.
Yeah, it sounds very, very important meditation technique. Yeah. Well, I would like to ask you one embarrassing question. I really enjoyed asking kind of, a torturous question, personal question. How are you preparing for your own death? Are there anything you are doing particularly in preparation for that?
I have 9-year-old daughter. I tell my 9-year-old daughter about death a lot. I gave birth to her when I was 44 years old. So she's more likely to lose her mother sooner than her friends. I keep telling her that even if I die, I will be near her. I'm not disappearing. I'm just moving around the corner and we will meet again. I promise that I would be close to her whenever she needs me. We can't be separated. What you see is not everything. Body is not everything. I gave my husband all my bank account passwords. I told him to date and remarry somebody after I died. Honestly, meeting somebody after I die is more than welcome, more than relief. My daughter is still young. If anybody can love and take good care of her, I can't ask more. I see cancer patients every day. If I have to die of any illness, I hope I die of cancer. Of course, I hope to live long and in good health. But cancer is a disease I know best. If I die of cancer, I'll probably have a chance of funeral in advance. I think having cancer is not too bad compared to other diseases. We can predict survival duration with considerable accuracy. You can have not only benefits of all the advanced modern treatments, but also adequate hospice care, including painkiller, sedative, and antidepressants, as freely as you want if you have a cancer. Even if it is not a cancer, I hope to remain in full function cognitively so that I can carry out voluntary and gradual fasting, the so-called VSED, when I become weak enough to get started. I'd like to choose the right timing of death, if possible.
That's fascinating. I've never heard a doctor saying die of cancer. But
because I know best.
But you're very persuasive, really. I'm sold, I have to say. Right. Just wondering whether is your daughter with us today?
Oh, she's here. She's listening to this session with his father.
Really? Right. Okay. Just I think one final question before we close our talk. Do you have one final word you want to give to those who are fighting cancers at this moment?
Yes. Fight your cancer long enough, but only long enough. Be prepared to step down when the time comes. I believe you can live well, just as you are, even though you have a cancer. Live as if you are going to live forever, and as if you are going to die today at the same time. Cancer is an unwelcome guest, but please don't think that cancer is nothing but a suffering. It is also an opportunity to discover yourself again and see things around you differently. Rather than focusing on the cancer, divert your thoughts to the remaining normal part of your body and the mental and spiritual sides as well. Death is not the end, nor everything, and the life at this moment is also precious. But when you realize that you are getting closer to death, please study more about death and afterlife. Think about the meaning of going back to home, where you came from, after a long journey of life. The sooner you begin to think about death and the afterlife, the better. This advice is not only for dying patients. It is also for us, those who will remain at the material plane for some time. Thinking of death and beyond will bring huge benefits to both dying and living people. We are not human beings with spiritual experiences, but spiritual beings of human experiences, like Father Pierre Teilhard Chardin said.
Okay, thank you so much. That was fascinating talk. I think I learned a lot. I'm sure the audience may have felt the same way. Now, let's open our talk to the floor and have discussions, comments and questions. And please feel free to ask any questions or make comments in any language or English or Korean. Mr. Yu will translate.
네, 한국말로 한국 청중들이 많으신데 해주시면 됩니다. 질문. 네.
Yeah, Mr. Yu, would you unmute your microphone and translate if there's anything necessary?
Sure. 그 한국 청년분들께서는 편하게 질문을 해주시면은 제가 영어로 또 통역을 바로 진행하겠습니다.
Well, so looks like we don't have any problems with the cancer, right? Oh, right. Okay, I have one. Eugene, do you have? I see your hand raised. Yes, do you have any
Yes,
questions?
I was very fascinated by the thought of people volunteering to not eat and not drink as a means to control the pain of imminent death. But in England, that's used to be called the Liverpool pathway. And I just wondered about the wisdom of not drinking. I can understand not eating, bringing about an end of life, but not drinking seems quite harsh.
VSD 관련된 질문이죠. 네, 통역해 주세요, 유진
네.
선생님.
이제 영국에 계신 유진님께서 질문을 주셨는데요. 이제 VSED 관련해서 오늘 이제 음식을 안 먹는 것은 알고 있었지만은 이제 식음료도 음료 자체도 안 먹는 것은 자기가 처음 들어서 사실은 이제 음료를 안 먹으면 굉장한 고통이 있을 것 같은데 실제로 그렇지 않은지에 대해서 여쭙고 있습니다.
이제 VSED도 이제 단계별이 있어요. 처음에는 이제 밥이나 이렇게 솔리드 푸드부터 안 먹고, 그 다음에 리퀴드는 허용했다가, 이제 허용이 아니라 배고프거나 먹고 싶거나 하면 얼마든지 드시는 거예요. 억지로 먹이지 않는 거예요. 억지로 먹이지 않는다는 게 가장 중요하고, 나중에는 이제 주스나 이런 음료는 입이 마르기 때문에 계속 먹는 경우가 많아요. 그리고 근데 그조차도 이제 뭐 장이 안 좋다든가 뭐 이렇게 폐색이 됐거나 이러면은 못 먹을 때가 있거든요. 그때는 그냥 얼음만 물고 있거나, 이건 굉장히 그래주얼하고 또 환자마다 너무 다르고, 그래서 억지로 안 먹고 그 리드가 있는데 안 먹는 건 아니에요. 그러니까 점차적으로 줄여가는 건 거고, 그 음료마저도 환자한테 부담이 될 때가 있어요. 고통을 유발시킬 때가 있어요. 특히 어쨌든 임종이 임박했을 경우에는, 그때는 이제 뭐 2, 3일 전, 하루 이틀 전에, 그때는 안 드시니까 굉장히 그래주얼하고 뭔가 non-violent하고 voluntary한 세팅이라고 보고, 그 하나에 뭐 집중되어 있는 건 아니에요. 그 뭐 어떤 루틴하게 늘 행해지는 건 아니에요.
So, Eugene, to answer your question, there are a number of stages to VSED. And the key point is that this methodology never forces a patient to drink. So typically patients would drink from time to time. The key practice is that you don't force the patients to drink for the survival of his health status. And it's also for some patients, active drinking actually causes pain and suffering. So that is what she has responded just now.
Okay, yeah. 김우주.
선생님.
네, 저 닉네임 코스모스입니다. 윤
안녕하세요,
교수님
선생님.
강의 잘 들었습니다.
제 스승님이세요, 저기.
네.
레지던트 때.
네, 안녕하세요.
감염내과 교수님이세요.
아, 예, 예전에, 저도 이제 환자분을 본 지가 이제 40년 되면서 그 환자분이 임종 시에 뭐 암이든 아니면 다른 뭐 그 감염병 폐혈증이든 뭐 코비드 19이든 임종 시에 편안한 상태로 온전한 그 아주 정신 상태로 임종을 맞이하는 것이 전 중요하다. 뭐 다음 생을 준비하든 또 가족과의 교감이 굉장히 중요하다고 생각하는데 질문은 현실적으로 많은 의사들, 전공이라든지 교수 스태프도 사실 어떤 그 환자의 임종 시의 죽음에 대한 평온한 준비, 맞이함을 준비시키는 것에 대한 거의 생각을 못하고 하루하루 환자의 치료와 진료, 거의 뭐 전쟁터와 같은 그런 생활을 하고 있는데 상당히 참 안타까운 일이죠. 저도 뭐 윤 교수님 말씀처럼 환자의 신체적 질환 또 정신적 질환 못지않게 임종 시에 마음의 상태를 안정시키는 게 중요한데 지금 현실에 특히 한국의 이 의료 시스템에서는 상당히 이제 적용하기가 어려운데 그럼에도 불구하고 앞으로 이제 단계적으로 전공이라든지 주니어 스텝 또 의사들이 그런 교육을 시작하는 것이 중요하다고 보는데 어떻게 현장에서 전공의들한테 교육을 하고 얘기를 해주고 계시는지요? 시작을 어떻게 해야 될까요?
유진우 선생님
Yeah.
영어로 좀 뭐 통역을 하시겠어요?
네, 그렇게 하겠습니다.
네.
So Mr. Kim, who I believe is also a doctor, he's been looking after patients for 40 years now, and he also believes that COVID-19 or any cancer, when it comes to death, the best way to die is in a very comfort state. But realistically speaking, when it comes to treating these patients at their end of their life, it's many doctors are focused in just on the treatment and diagnosis of these patients because they have to adhere to their physical conditions on a daily basis, like a battlefield almost. So his question is this: how would Professor Yoon, if you were to teach these medical students in how to employ, I guess, spiritual comfortness when it comes to death, how would you? What would be the first step to educating them to employ a spiritual aspect to in their last deathbeds?
정말 좋은 질문이고 지금 이게 사실은 교육이 정말 중요하다고 생각을 해요. 그리고 사회에서의 어떤 합의된 노음도 중요하다고 생각하고요. 근데 이제 지금 우리가 직접 이 삶과 죽음 현장에 맞부딪히고 있는 의사들 교육이 정말 중요하다고 생각을 합니다. 그래서 의과대학에서 커리큘럼으로 있어야 되고요. 그 다음에 내과 레지던트 트레이닝 기간에 있어야 된다고 생각을 해요. 근데 지금은 오블리게이션은 아닌 것 같아요. 의무가 아닌 것 같아요. 근데 이제 저 같은 경우는 한 10여 년 전부터 한 15년 넘은 것 같아요. 건국대학교 병원에서 그 건국대학교에서 시간을 얻어서 이 강의를 해요. 그 의과대학 4년 동안 한 4시간 정도. 예, 부족하지만 그 강의를 하고요. 그 다음에 이제 내과 레지던트로 들어왔을 때는 당연히 교육을 제 이제 온콜로지스트 레지던트로 돌 때 교육을 합니다. 그리고 직접적으로 얘기해요. 제가 뭐 의료 현장에서 너무 바쁘잖아요, 선생님. 우리 5분 진료, 뭐 1분 진료 하는데 그냥 아주 프랙티컬하게 어프로치하고 그냥 직접적으로 얘기해요. 환자한테 바로 교육하고 그 회진 돌면서 교육하고 그냥 틈 나는 대로 전공의들한테 교육하고 MGR이나 이런 거 할 때 컨퍼런스 할 때 교육하고 그냥 저는 되어지는 대로 바로바로 교육합니다. 네, 프랙티컬하게 좀 접근하는 편이에요. 근데 이제 이게 커리큘럼에
Professor
확실히 좀
Yoon,
있으면 좋을 것 같아요.
Professor Yoon, I think it's a bit too long to translate. I think so. If you could make it shorter.
So what, to his question, Professor Yoon has responded that, of course, the education of afterlife is very important, but of course we have to take account of the norms of current society, and of course the best method would be to have this, curriculum in place for medical students, but of course that's going to take time. So what Professor Yoon does is she just practices. She just tells her students whenever she has time. She tells her students about afterlife and near-death experience. Whenever she sees patients, she talks about it. Whenever she sees her students, she says it. So she just uses whenever she thinks of it, she uses her time to teach teach about afterlife knowledge.
제가 하나 제안을 드리면요. 그 한국에서 의사 국가 시험에 이제 꼭 출제하는 항목에 문제가 들어가면 그 의과대학에서 교육도 시키고 또 의사가 되려는 학생들이 공부도 하고 숙지를 하는 거기 때문에 좀 강제적인 방법이긴 하지만 대한민국은 좀 그런 강제성도 있고 빠르게 변하려면 대한의학회나 의사협회에서 이제 의과대학 학습 목표나 꼭 출제대한 문제 항목에 지금 임종시의 환자의 편안한 마음을 어떻게 그 환경을 조성하냐, 그런 게 꼭 그 커리큘럼에 들어가려면 대한의학회의 의사협회의 의과대학 학습 목표에 그걸 넣고 문제를 출제하면은 아마 단기간에 그냥 하기 싫어도 할 겁니다. 그게 한 좋은 방법 같아요, 제가 보기엔.
I couldn't agree more. 맞습니다.
네. 네, 이상입니다. 감사합니다.
진우쌤 통역을 좀 해주시죠.
So Mr. Kim has just offered that it would be best to have maybe a question for medical students in their exams to have anything in relations to afterlife. If they have some sort of questions are reflected in the exam, it would actually foster the medical field to actually look into this area in more depth in a more serious manner.
Well, I think, can I add one more thing? The Professor Jinwoo Yu, the gentleman who asked the question, was actually Professor Yoon's mentor when Professor Yoon was a student. I would like to add that.
네, 실제로 굉장히 유명한 감염병 선생님이세요. 코비드나 메르스 때도 굉장히 많은 역할을 하셨고요. 네, 네, 한국에서 굉장히 유명한 인펙션 선생님이세요. 감염내과 선생님. 그리고 저하고도 개인적으로 많이 가까운 사이고요.
Okay, yeah. Are there any questions? Professor Yoon just said Dr. Kim is an authority on what do you say, 감염내과 is infection, internal medicine. I don't know the specialist term. Yeah. Are there any questions or comments? Well, can I ask you a question, Professor Yoon? That was fascinating, the story of the old lady who just came back to life from cardiac arrest. Imagine we use the horrible term harvest, organ harvest. Imagine organ harvest was done on the old lady, which is really unthinkable. It's tragic really to think about. Professor Yoon, what do you think of organ donation personally? Are you supportive of that practice?
네, 물론 저는 너무 좋다고 생각하죠. 몸은 이제 뭐 사라지는 거지만 이제 오간 트랜스플란테이션 도너가 된다면 너무너무 좋죠. 그런데 이제 보통 이제 80 넘으신 분들은 병이 있는 분들은 도네이션 하기엔 좋은 캔디데이트는 아니고요. 일단 좀 갑자기 돌아가신 젊은 분들 그런 분들이 이제 트랜스플란테이션 도너로서 참 적합한 경우가 많은데 가끔 신문에도 나죠. 뭐 굉장히 젊은 나이에 갑작스러운 사고로 돌아가신 분들, 어린이들 여러 생명을 살리고 죽잖아요. 그러니까 죽고 나서 여러 생명을 살리잖아요. 너무나 좋고 훌륭하다고 생각을 합니다. 네. 그리고 제 의사로서 정말 모든 웰컴이고 너무 지금 사실 조혈모세포 이식 같은 경우는 지금도 할 수 있거든. 죽지 않아도 블러드 스템 트랜스플란테이션 도네이션은 지금도 할 수 있어요. 안 죽어도 이렇게 피를 통해서 하는 건데 본메럴 트랜스플란테이션이라고 해서 그래서 좋다고 생각합니다. 네.
I guess to answer Professor G's question, of course, Professor Yoon believes if a person chooses to be a donor, she's all for it. And of course, in the case of old lady, she wouldn't be really a proper candidate because of her age. But you often see in the news where in the media where young people when they die, they do their donor and they would save a number of lives. And there's also methods today where you could be a donor, but where you still live, such as bone marrow transplantation. That's one example.
But my concern was to take out organs from somebody who can actually come back.
그거는 사실 임상에 있으면은 좀 여기 의사분들도 있지만 쉽게 구별할 수 있어요. 생각보다. 네, 그리고 그리고 윤리위원회 같은 거가 굉장히 잘 꾸려져 있고 진짜로 이게 뇌사냐 아니냐 이런 것들은 굉장히 판단의 기준들이 좀 있습니다. 여기 신경과 선생님들도 계시고 근데 그게 막 지금 뭐 다시 돌아올 수 있는데 도네이션을 한다던가 이런 거는 거의 뭐 걱정하실 필요는 없을 것 같습니다.
Professor Yoon just responded that, of course, when it comes to determining if this person is going to come back or not, they have very strict technical guidelines to it, so that wasn't ever any problem for them.
한 말씀 올려도 될까요?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
예, 그 죽음을 대하는 태도, 죽음을 바라보는 시각 같은 것들을 듣고 굉장히 감명 깊게 잘 들었습니다. 특히 현직에 계신 그 의사 선생님께서 말씀을 하시니까 훨씬 더 듣기에 신뢰감도 가고 그랬습니다. 제가 가진 하나 질문은 사후 죽음 후에 무엇이 있느냐라는 것에 대해서 일반적인 어떤 케이스 바이 케이스가 아니고 의사로서 과학자로서 죽음 후에 사후 세계가 있다는 것을 어떤 과학자의 입장에서 근거를 가지고 그를 제시할 수 있는 그런 뭐 어떤 내용이 있는지 과학자로서 말씀해 주시길 바랍니다. 저도 부산대학교 경영학과에 재직 중입니다. 지금 통역을 하고 있는 유진욱은 아버지가 됩니다.
네.
반갑습니다. 예.
네, 감사합니다.
예.
네, 좋은 질문일 것 같아요.
Sorry, Mr. Yu, would you translate the question first from your father?
So that's that was just my father throwing that question. His question is, first of all, he thanks Professor Yoon for sharing her experiences, especially considering the fact that she's a doctor at practice. The question Mr. Yu had was, what scientific evidence, if any, could Professor Yoon provide at this moment in relations to existence of afterlife? Is there any empirical evidence or scientific evidence that she could think of at the moment that kind of proves the existence of afterlife or near-death experiences and whatnot?
네, 현대의학의 그런 방법론적에서는 증명할 수 없다, 이야기할 수 없다가 맞을 것 같아요. 근데 이제 아까 하면서도 얘기했지만 이미 수많은 사람들이 굉장히 반복해서 하는 경험이, 근데 그 수많은 사람들이 도덕적으로 아무 의미 없고 굉장히 일관성 있게 살아온 사람들의 진술이거든요. 그래서 그거에 대해서는 이제 믿지 않을 이유가 없다라고 저는 얘기를 하고 싶고요. 그 다음에 이게 정말 과학이 발달된다고 하더라도 저는 지금이 과학으로 증명할 수 없다라기보단 과학이 이걸 증명할 잣대를 가지고 있지 못하다라고 생각을 해요. 과학은 거기까지 미치지 못했어요. 그 방법론적인. 그리고 또 어쩌면 여기까지만 일단 또 먼저 또 너무 길면 안 되니까 진우 쌤이 좀 얘기해 주시겠어요?
네네. Because so many patients have told their very similar experience, you just couldn't ignore this. I guess it is also an evidence. It isn't a scientific one, but when it comes to similar experiences coming from many number of people, she believes that also proves to be an evidence of afterlife. And when it comes to proving afterlife on base of science, she believes that science cannot be a proper, I guess, proper platform or proper standard to look into life after death.
그리고 이제 종교학자 윌리엄 제임스가 이야기한 뭐 다양한 종교의 체험이라는 책에서도 얘기를 했지만 어쩌면 이거는 영원히 한 일부분은 미스테리로 남을 수도 있을 거라는 게 또 제 추측이기도 해요. 일부러 그렇게 디자인이 됐을 수도 있다라는 게 제 추측이기도 하고 이제 지금 의식의 비국소성에 대해서는 퀀텀 메카닉, 약간 양자역학에서 어느 정도 얘기를 하고 있고 저도 기대를 걸고 있어요. 올해 노벨 물리학상 받은 그 내용, 그 퀀텀 인탱글먼트도 이제 애프터라이프를 언젠가는 이제 그 증명할 수 있는 그런 툴이 될 수 있을지 모르겠어요. 그건 제가 또 할 일이 아니고 저는 이제 알려진 사실만을 하는 거지. 그런 두 가지를 말씀드리고 싶어요. 영원한 어떤 미스테리, unknown fact를 한 일부분은 남아있을 수도 있고 이후에 퀀텀 메카닉스가 조금 퀀텀 인탱글먼트 같은 게 의식의 비국소성, unlocalness 또는 애프터라이프, consciousness, 뭐 스피리트에 대해서 조금 더 설명을 해주실 수 있지 않을까 기대는 하고 있습니다만 현재로서는 제한이 있다라고 생각을 해요.
Professor Yoon
네,
believes Professor Yoon believes that is maybe designed that way to be a mystery for forever. Humans when we're in flesh form, we may never be able to find out its in the full reasons of death. So if she was to guess what kind of science could solve or at least give some kind of clues to afterlife, quantum mechanics would be the best guess. Quantum mechanics, such as quantum entanglement, that might give some sort of clues or answers to consciousness and life after death.
네, 잘 들었습니다.
네, 감사합니다.
말씀을 들으니까 제가 가지고 있었던 질문, 저는 항상 과학을, 저는 뭐 사회과학자지만, 항상 어떤, 의사결정을 하고 판단할 때 이것이 과학적인, 바탕에서 하고 있느냐를 굉장히 중요시하는데, 선생님께서 말씀하신 우리 인간이 가지고 있는 어떤 지적인 수준의 한계, 즉, 그런 우리가 가지고 있는 과학의 수준 그 자체가 벌써 한계점이 있지 않나. 그걸 기준으로 해서 과학적이다, 과학적이지 않다라고 말하는 것 자체도 문제가 있을 수 있다라는 제가 생각을 하게 됐습니다. 네, 감사합니다.
네. 이제 뭐 심하게 말할 수도 있지만 과학도 어느 정도는 믿을
Sorry,
수가 있거든요.
Mr. Yu, could you translate? Yeah.
So,
Ah.
Mr. Yu has responded that he also agrees with Professor Yoon in that science today, current science today, is not, I guess, I would say, scientific enough to prove life after death. We still have a long way to go when it comes to science. So when somebody's saying what's the scientific proof, it might not be a proper way to say it.
네, 그러니까 과학도 어떤 면에는 미신일 수가 있어요. 패러다임 시프트가 일어나기 전까지 뭐 쿤이라는 사람이 얘기를 했죠.
네.
서동설이 지동설로 바뀌는데 뭐 오랜 시간이 걸리고 패러다임 시프트가 일어날 때까지. 그때는 제발 우리가 좀 호기심을 가진 상태로 이안 스티븐스 박사가 말했죠. 그러니까 호의적 회의론자로 좀 남을 수만 있어도 굉장히 저는 좋을 것 같습니다. 네, 비난하고 아니라고 하기보다는. 네.
잘 들었습니다.
네, 감사합니다.
So Professor Yoon just ended her response in saying that it's always good to be a, I guess, positive attitude, skepticist when looking into life after death. And when we look at science, significant scientific discoveries, there was always a paradigm shift before a huge leap in science to discovery. So to us, life after death for us today might be a myth or it might be an illusion, but sometime in the future it may not be. So science is always evolving, so we should take account of that as well.
Well, thank you for the informative comments from Professor Yu, who happens to be Mr. Yu's father, who is a professor at Busan University. That was a very informative dialogue between social scientists and oncologists. And we see here a convergence, really, between humanities scholar and medical doctor about the need for a new paradigmatic outlook in order to understand life and death more properly.
I think we have a question from Stephen.
Stephen, yes.
Hello there. Yeah, there is certain parapsychologists who've done certain research with evidence of survival of bodily death, but it's still very early days. So it is going in the right direction, but it might take, well, quite a long time. Watch this space. It is a paradigm shift. But what I feel, what I can see, the intention, especially in getting younger people, like students, getting them engaged in the subject, getting them curious, inquisitive, and rather than just having a certain mindset to be flexible thinking. That's the key, and curiosity. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
스테프님께서 말씀을 하시기를 지금 과학적 근거 관련해서는 본인이 알고 있는 초심리학자들이 지금 죽음학에 대해서 어느 정도 과학적인 근거를 가지고 연구를 진행하고 있긴 한데 결과가 나오기까지는 시간이 좀 걸릴 것으로 예상을 하고 있고, 이제 윤 교수님께서 말씀하셨던 대로 이제 요즘에 그 어린 학생들이 죽음에 대해서 좀 더 호의적으로 바라보고 어떤 정해진 정해진 생각을 가지지 않고 유연한 생각을 가지고 죽음을 바라보는 것이 매우 좋을 것 같다라는 의견을 주셨습니다.
네, 고맙습니다. Thank you for nice comment.
Are there any comments or questions? Eugene, did you raise your hand again, or is it all the
Yes,
way?
I have one final comment.
Yeah.
Professor Yoon has talked about shared about deathbed experiences. Have you any experience of shared deathbed experiences, which also goes to substantial proof of what we're talking about?
그러니까 이제 여러 사람들이 아까 이제 그 증언했다는 부분이 과학적 증거는 안 되지만 증거가 될 수도 있고, 그리고 아까 윤 교수님께서 직접 겪으셨던 그런 메시지들도 증거가 될 수 있지 않겠느냐라는 유진님의 말씀이셨던 것 같습니다.
네, 제가 좀 생각하는 것도 많은 그냥 그 일관성 있게 살아온 사람들의 진술, 그리고 굉장히 많은 커먼한 포인트. 그 지난주 그 핌 롬멜 박사죠, 란셋의 그 프로스펙티브 스터디로 ND를 냈던 거, 그런 게 과연 비과학적인 건가는 또 생각할 문제인 것 같아요. 네.
So, 핌 교수님, 제가 그 방금을 못 들어가지고요. 핌 롬멜
네, 완전히 동의를 하고 일관적으로 살아온 사람들의 굉장히 공통적인 경험을 진술한 게 과연 비과학적인 건가는 또 그것도 질문의 여지가 있다라는 말씀 드렸어요.
So from Professor Yoon's experiences, these people who have shared their experiences, they've lived a pretty consistent life, and they seem to be a very credible people when it comes to providing evidence. So she agrees with you on that, Eugene.
Right. Thank you for your comments, Eugene. Now, are there any other comments or questions? Either you can type in the chat box, or you can raise your hands physically, or using the raise your hands. Okay, Suni Lee, could you please unmute your microphone and
폰을 켜서. 네.
류선 교수님 강의 잘 들었습니다. 예, 들리세요?
yes.
네, 잘 들려요.
네, 들리십니까?
네.
아, 네네. 강의 중에 그 명상 하시면서 키킹, 싱킹 이야기도 하셨는데요. 그러니까 이제 잘 죽는 것과 어떤 명상의 어떤 관계에 대해서 조금 더 추가적인 설명이 가능하신지 궁금합니다.
네.
So her question is, so Professor Yoon has mentioned about meditation and how she practiced a kicking thoughts methodology, and Suni asked what do you think, what Professor Yoon thinks about the correlation or relationship between dying well and meditation.
그러니까 뭐 좋은 질문이고요. 그러니까 우리가 생각으로만 살면 고정관념에 많이 얽매여 사는 것 같아요. 삶과 죽음, 뭐 여러 가지 고정관념. 근데 이제 잠깐 생각의 틈을 내는 것, 그래서 또 스페이스를 발견하는 명상이 실제로 그 고정관념을 많이 해결해주고 삶과 죽음에 대해서 조금 오픈마인드로 만들어주는 것 같습니다. 그리고 삶을 더 충실하게 살 수 있게 만들고요. 그래서 이거는 나중에 한번 아마 영국에서도 명상을 많이 한다고 들었어요. 좀 같이 얘기해 보면 더 좋을 것 같아요. 저보다 더 얘기를 잘해 주실 수 있는 분들이 있을 것 같습니다.
So Professor Yoon responded that, Kicking Thoughts methodology focuses on Kicking Thoughts methodology focuses on giving a space to your mind. So people consistently think about something in their daily lives. So this methodology implores people to have some sort of room in between. And in practicing in doing so, people will be able to be more free from their preconceptions or bias, which will then lead to more open-minded views towards death, as well as more, I guess, active attitude towards current life. So that was her response.
감사합니다, 선임님 질문해 주셔서. Thank you for asking.
네, 교수님 감사합니다.
Thank you. We have just 1 minute left. If anybody has a very short question, you are very welcome. If there's no other question, Professor Yoon, can I ask a really quick question? You just mentioned in passing we need death education targeting at children. Will they understand what death is, and therefore death education will work?
저는 바로 워크한다고 생각합니다. 왜냐하면 제 딸한테 엄청나게 하고 있기 때문에. 일단 아이들은 내가 어디서 왔어? 왜 어떻게 태어났어? 하는 거랑 이렇게 죽음도 굉장히 관심을 똑같이 갖고 있다고 생각을 해요. 그리고 요즘에 반려견이라든지 또 어릴 때부터 사랑하는 어떤 존재의 그 죽음은 많이 경험을 하니까 그 프랙티컬 어프로치를 할 수 있을 것 같습니다. 네. 뭐 진우쌤도 아이 키우고 있잖아요. 죽음에 대해서 애기가 안 물어봐요?
네, 많은 생각이 들게 됐습니다.
네.
So, 지영희 교수께서 물어보셨던 질문은 아이들을 대상으로 죽음학을 교육하는 게 과연 실효성이 있는가, 이게 정말 먹히는 방법인가라고 물어보셨던 것 같고요. Professor Yoon just has responded that she is teaching her nine-year-old daughter about death, and she believes that it will work on children even in their early age. And she felt that these young kids are very curious about death as much as they're curious about how they were birthed from their parents. And if you look at current society today, a lot of people raise pets, and these pets, of course, live shorter lifespan than humans. So, of course, kids could also learn about birth and death. So she believes that education of death will work on children.
덧붙이자면은 애들은 선입견이 없기 때문에 더 쉽게 받아들일 수 있을 것 같아요. 네.
And to add on, these children, of course, don't have any preconceptions or bias because of their age. So that also helps them to absorb the knowledge about death.
Well, thank you for the persuasive answer. It was really helpful. I think it's time to close. I would like to say really big thanks to you all, Professor Yoon, Mr. Yu, and all those who made profoundly wise comments and very useful questions. Really, it was a fascinating session. And as I said, I think we need to invite Professor Yoon again for a second time and hear more about her views on life and death. And really, Professor Yoon only talked for 1 hour, but to get the deep meaning and wisdom, we need many days really to think about. Thank you very much again, Professor Yoon. On that note, we'll have to close our session, but just one thing to announce before you go. Please don't forget our next forum, which will be on the 1st of April with Professor Carl Becker at Kyoto University. He will talk about if there are any Asian ways of dying, which may sound very enigmatic and fascinating, Asian ways of dying. So please feel free to come, and you can visit our website, www.oxfordhumans.com for more information. Right, otherwise, I wish you all the best, and I will see you again very soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.